This is The Doorstep, sponsored by the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs, featuring Nicholas Gvosdev, Tatiana Serafin, and Christian Davenport. This episode was recorded on April 8th, 2021.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Doorstep podcast. I'm your co-host, senior fellow here at the Carnegie Council, Nick Gvosdev.
And I'm Tatiana Serafin, senior fellow as well at Carnegie Council. And I am over the moon today to speak with Christian Davenport from the Washington Post, a reporter covering the defense and space industries. He joined the Post in 2000 and has had an array of assignments, but today he is here to speak with us about space and his book, The Space Barons, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and the Quest to Colonize the Cosmos. I love it. I want to talk about it because I have to do it. Space is the final frontier. I had to. Thank you so much for joining us, Christian. I wanted to say that what we do here at the Doorstep is to bring home to Main Street USA the importance of foreign policy issues that they might not be looking at, news that they might not see because everybody's so focused on the pandemic, on the economy. And this space, I believe, is one of those issues that do not get enough press, I think, and certainly your piece from yesterday was amazing. I want to talk about that and really highlight the issues of why this is important and why people should be talking and looking at this. Yesterday in class, I asked my students to tell me that their top words when I said space. So here they are. We can react to them. Innovation, Elon Musk, movies, opportunity, exploration, Mars, money, expansion, and junk. Junk. I'm also excited to do this podcast today because Monday, April 12th, is the 60th anniversary since the Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. So I feel like we're celebrating important anniversaries. It's also 40 years since the first space shuttle flight, and so much is going on. I think so much is going on in the private sector, and so much is going on in governments and in the a new space race. But I want to start off with the billionaires in this space. What are they doing? What are their goals? What are we looking at? The students know Elon Musk, but that's not the only person in the game.
Yeah, right. And it's fascinating to me when you go through the words, one of the words they didn't say NASA. Which is really interesting, that if you think the younger generation, they talk about innovation, they talk about money, they're aware of the junk in space and the debris. And they talk about, the billionaires, the space barons, and they talk about Elon, but they don't talk about the government. It was always the government. And what we're seeing with the billionaires is the erosion of the government's long-held monopoly on space. And now it's being, commercialized and democratized, and it's moving into the private sector. And that's what's new here. And that's what the billionaires are able to do. And it's just because the barrier to, the entry was so high, the cost was so high, only governments could build and develop rockets. And now, they're seeing that through innovation, another of the students' words, the cost of rockets and manufacturing techniques have come down, but the access has come down. And, they say as a journalist, follow the money. And so that's where I was like, well, if the two richest men in the world are dedicating their lives to space, and one of them, Jeff Bezos, says that's the most important work I'm doing, and yes, he owns the Washington Post where I work, and yet space is the most important work he's doing, then that's something I think we really ought to be paying attention to.
And there's different things that are happening in this race to space from the billionaire angle. Some of it is space tourism. So we have a bunch of people in there. And some of it, it's really important, which happened yesterday, is this internet satellites that are going up that I don't think people really realize where their internet access is coming from, especially in rural areas. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think this is really important as a doorstep issue.
Yeah, sure. So, and it's not new, but SpaceX and actually Amazon wants to do it as well. And a company called OneWeb want to essentially put up constellations of satellites. And we're not talking, dozens, we're not talking hundreds, we're talking thousands of satellites that are relatively small and inexpensive, so that if one fails, no big deal, bring it back down, put up another one. And they would beam essentially internet signals to ground stations, sort of like getting your satellite TV from space, to serve underserved areas that don't have, fiber or cable. These are rural areas, and there is an estimated like 4 billion people on Earth who don't have access to the internet. With the Biden administration, we're seeing, these plans for infrastructure, and there's a lot of talk that, broadband and internet access should be part of that, should be part of the infrastructure. And SpaceX and Amazon and these companies want to do that now, and they're able to do it because satellite technology has come such a long way. I mean, satellites used to cost hundreds of millions of dollars, be massive, about the size of a garbage truck. Now they can be as small as a loaf of bread and have amazing capability, just like you had a mainframe computer and now you have your iPhone, which is in your pocket. Like, we've seen that revolution in computing move from the personal computing to satellites. And so that's what they want to do. But there are a lot of issues when you put up thousands of satellites in space, because there is that debris issue.
Is anybody addressing the debris issue? So I'll tell you what the students said is they read a horror story that debris could cover the entire planet and then you couldn't get out, and it would just, never mind covering space, but also crashing into us. Anybody addressing that issue?
So, I mean, people are talking about it. There is a lot more talk, but it's such a difficult problem to tackle because it's an international issue. I mean, it's something really that would have to be solved at the UN, and there are different countries with different priorities who all have to get along. But as of right now, there is no regulation that says, you have to move a satellite. The US government and really the Defense Department tracks all of these objects in space, and they can tell to satellite operators, there is a good possibility that these two are going to collide. And if you've seen the movie Gravity, when things collide in space, they're traveling very, very fast. I mean, the International Space Station is traveling at 17,500 miles an hour. So if two things crash, it could have enormous consequences, creating more debris, and then that begets more debris and more debris. So the US government can say, well, there could be they call it a conjunction. There could be a collision, but they don't have the authority to tell satellite operator A to move your satellite. In fact, there are no regulations that say on your satellite, you have to have propulsion so that you can move your satellites. Some satellites, they can't be moved. And of course, some satellites, even if they did have propulsion, they're dead and there's no way to maneuver them. So this is a huge issue, and there's a lot of talk, but as of right now, not a lot of action.
Very interesting. We do want to go into the government space to talk about that, but I want to talk still more about the commercial aspects, because this is what we'll be hearing about, right? But, as you said, the billionaires have taken over the story in this space. Used to be, it was only Branson, Richard Branson of Virgin, talking about space and Virgin Galactic. I think initially it was 2009. He said we were going to be going there. He was going to have people going to space. Now I think the magic number is 2024. Not sure. What are you seeing on the space tourism front?
Yeah, so it's interesting. That's really come a long way. And Richard Branson's been working on it for years and years and years. Jeff Bezos wants to do it. They want to do suborbital space tourism, where you go essentially straight up, just scratch the edge of space, but you don't go in orbit around the Earth and you come right back down. But you'll be in space for about 5 minutes before you start descending back through the atmosphere. You'll experience weightlessness. You'll see the Earth, from space. So you'll, even though it's the middle of the day, it'll be dark. You'll have a great view of the stars. You'll see the curvature of the Earth, the thin line of the atmosphere, land masses without borders. And I think a lot of people sort of deride that and say this is a plaything for the rich, like it costs $250,000 or more for 5 minutes. But I actually think it could have a profound effect. I mean, astronauts talk about the overview effect, and they talk about, seeing the Earth, and that turns them into globalists and environmentalists, and it has a profound effect on them. And yet there have only been about 550 people who have ever been to space. since Yuri Gagarin. And if you double that number, triple that number, and all of a sudden, we're 10 years out, and many, many more people have had that perspective, and it gets to the point where someone who knows someone who's been to space, and they talk about that. I actually think that could have a profound effect on society. In addition to the suborbital space tourism, we've now seen SpaceX have 2 missions on the books, one to launch in September, another one to launch maybe in January or early next year, of space missions to orbit. One would stay in orbit around the Earth for about 3 days. The other one would actually go to the International Space Station. But these are missions comprised entirely of civilians. I mean, no government trained astronauts. And these are, in the one case, they're billionaires. They paid $55 million for the right to be able to go to the International Space Station. The other mission, it's called Inspiration 4. It's led by Jarek Isaacman, who also a billionaire who's buying this trip on SpaceX, and he sort of auctioned off some of the other seats. But again, those are everyday people who will have this experience. And the idea is that if the cost to getting to space comes down, more and more people will have it, not just on the suborbital space tourism, but actually going to orbit.
So going to the International Space Station.
Or staying in a capsule and free flying around, the Earth like John Glenn did.
Wow. How far away do you think that is based on your reporting?
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing. SpaceX has now flown NASA astronauts, government astronauts, twice to the International Space Station. So they've proven out the technology. They've proven they can fly people safely, bring them back safely. Don't forget that. That's a big thing. And
Yeah.
so, they're set. They have the crews are picked. They're training now. They're fitted for their spacesuits. So a flight in September and then one coming early next year. So this is right around the corner. For the suborbital space tourism, Blue Origin, that's Jeff Bezos's company, and Virgin Galactic are hoping they can start flying customers or people this year. It's taken a lot longer than for both companies. There've been a lot of delays. They want to be very careful about it. And, this is, we talk about rhapsodizing about all the benefits and the awe of space, but it's very risky. It's very, very dangerous. Virgin Galactic had a fatal accident in 2014 that killed one of the co-pilots. So they also want to move very carefully with this as well.
Absolutely.
So I was fascinated by the comment that you made about as people go up, the overview effect, and that it has a transforming effect. And I was thinking about this in context that really right now, the only part of the US-Russia relationship that isn't collapsing is the space cooperation. That seems to be the one area that's ring-fenced. And we talk a lot about great power competition with China, and we're gearing up. But is space still an area where major powers and middle powers that are seeking to be able to get into space? And of course, this is where the private companies can offer an advantage to a country to say, you can't have your own space program, but you can buy time and space with us to get into orbit. Do you see this as an area where countries, in fact, despite their competitive nature on Earth, are going to be able to cooperate? Or are you concerned that terrestrial great power rivalries will just extend themselves into space?
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating question because you're right. Right now, the United States and Russia cooperate on the International Space Station. And before SpaceX came along and were flying NASA crews starting last year, there was almost a 10-year gap between the space shuttles, which retired in 2011, to when SpaceX came along. I mean, people forget there was again, a 10-year period where NASA did not have the ability to fly astronauts to space. We had to rely on Russia to do that, right? And they took our astronauts to space. When you're in space, like you're basically putting, your lives in each other's hands. So they work very, very closely and very, very well together in space. The United States, however, does not cooperate in space with China. I mean, they are effectively barred from doing that. And you're seeing China emerge as, a great force in the space race. They landed a spacecraft on the far side of the moon, which had never been done before. They're talking about building their very own space station. And the International Space Station has been up there for about 22 years or so. It springs leaks from time to time. It gets hit with this debris that we're talking about. It's getting old, and it's not going to last forever. And at some point, it's gonna come down. And it's interesting that NASA's looking to the private sector for the next generation of space stations, but China's building their own. And they're already talking about partnering with other governments like Russia in order to do that. So yes, it's not like the US, Soviet space race during the Cold War that got us to the moon, not by any means. But you are seeing some rivalries there. And, on the other hand, it might be good to have competition, but, space is so difficult and so expensive that really, if you're going to go to the moon and Mars, you need international collaboration for that to happen. It's just too difficult.
I just wanted to build on that as well, both the question of expense, but also the question of focus. And maybe Tatiana, from your students, and you could bring this back in as well, which is this, is the ability to go into space, to develop the resources of space, to get us back to the moon and then to the other planets of the solar system. Do you think that this is going to be able to generate, first of all, new levels of economic activity? Obviously we have people like Andrew Yang saying, look, a lot of economic activity on Earth is going to get phased out. And we're going to need good jobs for people as space, a growth area in that regard. And then is this something that's inspiring, right? That, you were talking about the Cold War and the space race, and certainly during the 1960s, this was a real national motivation. It provided a sense of unity, particularly at a time when the United States was facing some pretty dramatic social problems at home. The space race helped to overcome some of that. And now today in the 2020s, people look and say they see division in the United States. They see the social compact unraveling. Is space not only poised to deliver dollars to the pocketbook, but can it also maybe bring back a sense of national purpose and be something that unifies people?
Yeah, so I'll take the inspiration part first. I think Elon Musk has almost single-handedly reinvigorated interest in space in a way that we haven't seen before. And a lot of people know exactly where they were, when Apollo 11 landed in 1969, and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon. But that generation is sort of passing, and now the new generation, like your students, and they're talking about Elon Musk, and they're seeing rockets that not only take off but can land again, so that they can be reused. Typically rocket boosters were just ditched in the ocean. Now Elon is landing them and reflying them, and they're seeing those images and seeing the advancement in technology. And that, I think, leads to the second part of the economics, that using those innovations to reuse the boosters and refly them again lowers the cost of access to space. Imagine if you took an airplane from New York to LA and you threw away the airplane, right? That would make commercial air travel just prohibitively expensive. Yet in space, that's what we were doing. So when the cost comes down, then the opportunities for economic growth come through. And clearly, Elon and Jeff are doing this not just to inspire, not just for the sake of humanity. They're businessmen. They see economic opportunity in this. Clearly, we're seeing this with the internet constellations, right? Where SpaceX goes from being a rocket making and exploration company to an internet provider, right? They're NASA and Verizon, which is sort of a weird thing to think about. There's also a lot of talk, and this is a little bit more far-fetched, of mining asteroids. And yet there's actually a law that Congress passed in 2015 that said if a company mines a celestial body, the company has the right to those resources. And there are a lot of people who think that going out and mining these asteroids for precious metals, could lead to an economic boom, but we are not there yet. There have been many companies that have tried and gone bankrupt, but that is the ultimate goal, to try to get there. But it's sort of a step-by-step process. First, you've got to stop throwing your rockets away and make spaceflight a little bit more routine and bring the cost down. And we're not at that point where there's a self-sustaining economy. A lot of people focus on the billionaires, but of course the government and its resources are a huge player here. And SpaceX and a lot of these companies don't exist without that infusion of taxpayer money.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, that governments, even if they're not recognized as the beneficiaries and donors, they are there in the background, not only NASA, but also the Pentagon, because certainly the Pentagon has interests in a lot of these small sats. I think you mentioned in your article, for surveillance purposes, to get behind enemy lines. You mentioned a company that can really has better, resolution of images from space that are helpful not only to governments, but not for profits. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there that are funded by the government. And also, we have to look at what the government gets out of this too. I read a recent op-ed about space and what you were saying, and what you were alluding to, Christian. Imagine the eerie scenario of China or Russia removing the American flag that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin planted on the moon in 1969 and returning it to Earth to use as propaganda to advance their own interests in the space race. Laugh, but I do think, to your point, China and Russia did sign an agreement. How is this going to change? Is that there an opportunity to not work together? Forget the people. Instead will create this animosity in space, and we have other players that I do want to mention coming in as well. India, the United Arab Emirates, trying to make a play. So, just coming back to the question again, on a governmental level, what kind of, moves are you seeing to cooperate and also just to play their own game for our own defenses?
Right. So there are a couple of things. Under the previous administration, NASA came out with what were called the Artemis Accords. And Artemis it's a program to go back to the moon, to return astronauts to the moon for the first time since Apollo. And as a result of that, NASA said, we want to create these sort of, bilateral agreements with partner countries to join our efforts. Because again, going to the moon requires all the resources from the commercial sector, but also from as many international partners as they can get. And to sign the Artemis Accords, those are, sort of, rules of the road in space that partners would need to agree to. So, for example, if you do science in space and you make a discovery, you need to share that with the world, that everybody benefits from it. You have to be transparent about what you're doing and where you're going to be. And so that if you're on the moon and you're mining, you need to let people know where you are and what you're doing, and to be very sort of transparent about all of that. And they're getting signatories to that. NASA is to work to go forward. And yet when you talk about space now, so that's sort of the diplomatic effort, the military effort, and I think a lot of people derided the Space Force, right? And there was that Netflix series about it. But if you think about what we use space for, from a military standpoint, it's remarkable. When you mentioned the reconnaissance, it's also missile warning, missile defense. That little blue dot on your iPhone, the GPS signal, that comes from an Air Force satellite. And it not only gets you like to your kid's school in the morning or to work, it guides precision guided munitions, right? So that the bomb hits, the bad guys in the convoy and not the school bus with kids, right? And all that comes from space. And these satellites are there literally like sitting ducks. And other countries, notably China and Russia, have demonstrated that they can take those satellites out with a missile, or they can mess with the software or the sensors, and they can jam it. They can render a reconnaissance satellite blind for a minute. So, there's a lot going on up in space, that these people know. I had one military person say at a conference once, Sputnik, when that went up, people freaked out. They absolutely was pandemonium and panic. He was like, it was a beach ball. The beep, that's all it was. If the general public were aware of what's going on in space today, like it would be that level of sort of, concern. So.
Well,
But not space lasers, though, not yet.
but I think it is important to talk about this issue, which is why we're doing this on the doorstep, to allow people the opportunity to question, well, where are my tax dollars going? How much money is being spent on this? We're talking so much about the infrastructure plan, the trillions in economic recovery, and not the billions that are being dedicated to this effort, and which these are our tax dollars at work, and I think it's important to look at what they're doing, and on a diplomatic front, is it leading to cooperation or is it not leading to cooperation? On that front, I want to ask, do you see any other countries getting into the game? I mentioned India and the UAE. Are any other countries that we should look out for that are investing in space?
I would say those are the two big ones. I mean, the UAE in particular is fascinating. They just sent a HOPE probe to Mars that's in orbit around Mars. So the only Arab country to ever do that. They were very transparent in the way they went about that. They actually went to the international community for space and science, and they said, we want to do this. Where can we contribute, with an orbiter? What's the science that's already been done? What's the science we need to sort of advance? And they basically decided that their orbiter could help study the Martian atmosphere, winds on the surface, but also in the upper atmosphere. And so that's what they're doing, and should start to begin sharing some of their science within a few months. So that was a very big deal to have an Arab country, and a wealthy one, trying to diversify its economy off oil and seeing space as a way to do that. Also to inspire its workforce, that they've pushed really hard for that. I think what's going on in the UAE is fascinating. India as well, they sent their spacecraft to the moon, and it almost got there, but I guess crashed at the last minute. And the other thing I would say is, neither of them are partners on the International Space Station. But as NASA moves to commercial space station, that's where a lot of these commercial providers see the potential for a viable, economic business, because they'll be able to not just take wealthy tourists, but to have governments who didn't have a partnership on the ISS, they'll be able to, work with these private ones for research and send their astronauts there.
So interesting. So you mentioned Mars. We have so much going on at Mars. Can you talk about a little bit, some of the innovations? I read something about a helicopter. I can't wait to see how that works.
Yeah, so just recently, NASA landed another rover on Mars, Perseverance, about the size of a car. It'll do a lot of science. It's really exciting. And yes, it had a helicopter called Ingenuity, tethered to its belly. It's about 4 pounds or so. It's really small. The Martian atmosphere. I mean, the good news for Ingenuity is that the gravity on Mars is about a third of what it is on Earth, but the atmosphere is like 100th. It's just a fraction of what it is here. So it's hard for the propellers to get any purchase. So it's got these two propellers that go sort of counter rotate. They go very, very fast, and it's just a tech demo. It's a cool thing to see. They'll be able to do, fly a helicopter on another planet. Will be the first time. If you think about, if they're able to perfect that technology, what that will mean, because these rovers are kind of plodding and they're slow and they take a long time. But if you can send a helicopter with a camera and inspect craters and go check out this rock formation over here, and that looks like that could have been a delta, there could have been water there, and it could really give them really good close eyes on the surface of Mars. So yeah, that's a pretty exciting thing. And people don't realize, like, NASA landed this rover on Mars. It's just so incredibly difficult. And for all the talk of the billionaires and Elon and Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, none of them are coming close to landing on Mars yet, right? That's still NASA, with that shows that, it was nice to see that NASA, the big, the old guys, pull off such a huge mission and really show that, when it comes to these super ambitious missions, the government's still the only game in town.
That is such a great note to leave off our discussion on, and certainly we'll be looking more at this as more and more happens. Would love to have you back, maybe after September, to see how that mission goes and review where we are in this new space race of money. Is how I'll leave that off.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Doorstep, sponsored by the Carnegie Council for Ethics in International Affairs. For more, go to carnegiecouncil.org. Stay healthy and safe.